Alright, culture swap.
Swap my culture.
Thank you very much, Jack. So I think I'm going to let Jason kind of talk about, sort of set this up as to kind of an overview of what it's about, and also why you chose this.
All right. I suggested we do a real culture swap in that we should watch a film from where I'm from in Quebec, Canada. Because I could have gone with so many great Canadian films, but no. I decided to go for a film that could have only been made in Quebec for a Quebec audience. So I chose 2006's Bon Cop, Bad Cop, a film directed by Erik Canuel that stars Patrice Bélanger and Colm Feore. Just because I figured that if we were going to do a real culture swap, this is where I'm from, this is the anxieties that these people go through, and it is one of the movies that I had a little bit of trouble with on my initial viewing. When I saw it back in 2006, I was very angry at the picture, but when I watched it again yesterday, I don't know if, like I was saying to you guys, if I had matured and had calmed down a little bit more, or I had just basically said to myself, "Oh, this actually makes sense. It's not a bad picture. It's not a great picture either." But I thought it showed, what Quebec, what was at a point. I mean, they're still living this at this moment in time. So I chose the film because it's predominantly preoccupied with a lot of the socio-cultural anxieties that I witnessed growing up while I was in Quebec. And so I'm looking forward to delving into it. It gave me a bigger appreciation for the film, although I don't think the director knew what the hell he was doing.
I'm pleased you handled the names there, because I would have absolutely butchered the pronunciations.
What did you guys think of the film? Let's get to that first, and then we'll get into the more nitty-gritty crap.
Jack, do you want to start?
So I enjoyed it. I think it's a good sort of buddy cop sort of comedy. There's very obviously comedic scenes and stuff, which I thought were quite good. A lot of the stuff landed. I thought it was interesting seeing a film that was, half French and half English language-wise.
Right.
That's unusual. I don't think I've particularly seen a film where I've got to watch it because I need the subtitles for the French part or for one part of it, but then, fully understand another part without it. So that was a bit weird, but also interesting.
Right.
But yeah, no, it wasn't a great film, but it was enjoyable for me.
See, I found myself enjoying it a lot more than I thought, because you didn't really sell it to me, Jason, to be fair, because I think when you first said this is what I wanted for Culture Swap, you said it's not a film that I particularly like.
Yeah, I don't particularly like
it. So I was like, okay, here we go. But yeah, I actually found myself getting really into it and quite enjoying. I like a good sort of buddy cop type movie. I appreciated the comedy in this, and I did like that sort of that clash at the centre of it between these two different, the way they embody the two different characters by kind of with the locational differences and the language differences,
right?
And just the way they're kind of put forward. Because I feel like with buddy cop movies, you always have that that difference there. If you look at something like Lethal Weapon, for example.
Good, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, but this just has a much smarter way, I think, of showing of bringing those differences to the screen.
Okay.
So yeah, I found myself really enjoying it a lot more than I was expecting. And I didn't really overthink about what I would get from it. And I've never seen a film from Quebec before, which is definitely something that I wanted to do at some point. So I'm pleased I finally have an excuse to.
Cool.
But I just love the fact that hockey was such a central focus to this movie.
It's one of the things that I hated the most, but we'll get into that later.
I just thought it was so I was just oh yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it be?
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
To me, why go with the entire stereotype that, it's hockey? I was like, fucking hell, guys. Don't you guys have anything else to talk about?
Yeah, I thought it was quite funny. Because I've been to Canada, a long time ago. I was in a long-distance relationship with someone who was in Canada, and at this time I was living at home and working full-time.
Right, what's his name?
So I could just afford to...
I'm kidding.
I'll just let that fly. Yeah, I could afford to travel over there. I think I visited 4 or 5 times in a year. So that was fun. And also I've been skiing with my mum over there a few times as well.
Cool.
So I kind of have a little kind of amount of experience with the culture.
Right.
But never Quebec or anything.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, being from here, like, my opinion is is biased. You know, like, given what I had mentioned a little bit earlier with my upbringing in Quebec, but I mean, not necessarily identifying with the culture and being forced to not identify with the culture, and then going outside of Quebec, and again being told, "Well, you're from Quebec," and I'm like, "Well, they told me I wasn't," and so it's always been a little bit strange to me, and especially growing up in a small town like Baie-Comeau, and even now living in Quebec City itself, the Anglo-Franco rivalry is something that is very present. And it's one of these things that's just hovering over the culture where you're like, why can't you guys acknowledge that there is a part of the English history that is also part of your history? You know, there's a lot of laws that have been passed for language here in Quebec that, you know, if I hadn't been privy to go to the English school because my mom was an Anglophone, then my kids couldn't go. There are laws like that here that, like, they serve to protect the language. However, when these laws were installed in the late 70s, which was Bill 101, I even had a student this semester come talk to me about it, because this is something that I lived through, and my mom too, which was like, she was like pretty much a victim of language racism, if you will, when she was growing up in Baie-Comeau. You know, people used to throw rocks at them and tell them, like, you know, get the fuck out of here, you Anglophones, you know. And people used to swear at me, you know, they look at you weird. Sometimes even here in Quebec City, if I'm speaking English to my kids, I get this look. It was like, fuck, I only thought they existed on TV, you know.
So, like, for someone who knows nothing about, like, the history of this, where did this divide, like, start?
Oh, this is 400 years ago, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was there, like, a something that ignited this? Or...
Well, I mean, like, the French had come over, and they started, like, colonizing the what they call Upper Canada and Lower Canada, you know, and then the British and anybody who was coming from the States, essentially after the Civil War, had decided to the Loyalists coming up towards like the Maritimes and, you know, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So you had all these people that were wanted to stay affiliated to the crown, but a lot of the English decided to fuck off. They decided to leave, essentially. And the same thing happened with a lot of the French. So they decided to stay here, but because it was predominantly an English place surrounded by these small French colonies, you know, the French were constantly trying to not be suppressed. So I think the English actually started this rivalry by treating the French like shit. But now we've gone like 180 degrees where you have this grudge that's being held against the crown, essentially, where you're like, okay, we have to kind of sit down and talk about how this reflects on the culture in general. Because the student that I had this semester was really fun when she started piecing together that the laws that they put together at the end of the 70s weren't necessarily laws that would protect the French language. It would actually be laws that would actually kind of eradicate every other language that was here. So essentially part of the Quebec culture that was English is slowly being kind of weeded out. And so a lot of the schools here in Quebec, especially the schools that I went to when I was a kid, they were already small. I mean, you'd have a population in Baie-Comeau that was about roughly 28,000 people, but in there you'd have maybe a school which had like 300 or 400 Anglophone students, and the same amount in a French school. But after the laws were passed, you'd see those numbers slowly dwindling because you didn't have like an Anglophone grandfather or grandmother. So people that were Francophones that wanted their kids to learn English weren't allowed to send their kids to English schools anymore. And so they slowly started weeding out all that. And I mean, right now, the school that I used to go to, I think they have 60 students now. And that's from kindergarten to high school. Right? This is not just elementary. This is, you know, and so the schools, they're barely staying open. And so you have these very...
how many is that in a class then?
3 sometimes, man.
Right, okay.
Which is, you know, great for funding.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I'm a little biased when it comes to this because I've been caught in the middle of this Anglo-Franco rivalry, and I didn't necessarily understand it much. And obviously, my affiliation is more on the Anglophone side. The way I process information is more English than it is French. My English is much better than my French is. Even if the people are listening to this and be like, this guy sounds like he has a French accent, I'm like, fuck you. Sorry, I live in Quebec City, so there's clearly going to be some seepage. But it's very strange sometimes to live in a place like this that I won't say it's backwards thinking, but it is kind of a weird gated community where a lot of stuff happens inside, but they don't let a lot of information from outside come in. And that's where I think that Bon Cop, Bad Cop is a really good example of where Quebec is. You know, as progressive as they can be, you'll have these giant stars that are going to come out, like Cirque du Soleil, or you're going to have Céline Dion, or even just recently guys like Denis Villeneuve, who's gone on to Hollywood and direct films. You have these monuments, but the mentality in Quebec is if they've succeeded, it's because they're corrupt. There's something wrong with them, you know, where you're like, what the fuck, you know, because there's a very socialist mindset here, although it's backed by American capitalism, which is a dichotomy in and of itself. So,
yep, that's unusual.
It is, yeah. People are like, let's stick together. And then after that, you're like, but not with them.
We should also mention that there will be spoilers for this film.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So how was this film kind of received?
This is actually one of the biggest grossing films, not only in Quebec, and I think in Canada. It had an $8 million budget, which is essentially the same budget as Pulp Fiction back in '94. And it was very, very well received. I forgot to check the numbers, but I know that it was a box office hit here in Quebec because Patrice Bélanger, the guy who plays David Bouchard, is first and foremost a stand-up comedian. He's a guy who, he was a stage act who went to because here in Quebec they have a national institute for comedy where you can actually go to school and study to be a comic. And a lot of the comedians that perform here in Quebec will actually go through that school. And he was one of the graduates there. And he made a name for himself being a stand-up comic first and foremost. And because he was such a popular presence, and he's always, like, if you talk to him about film, he is a film buff. He loves movies a lot. I used to work at HMV down on Peel in Montreal, and he would be a regular customer. He'd come in and buy a fuck ton of DVDs and then leave. And he's also a collector. I don't know if it's action figures or anything like that, but one of my buddies used to work in a statuette and action figure store, and he'd walk in occasionally, look around, and try to pick a few things out. So I don't want to assume that that's what he was doing there, but from a story, from a mouth, you know, that I know very well, one of my best friends said that he would come in and buy a couple of things every now and then.
Oh, fair enough.
And so, he used to do a lot of sketch comedy, and he had a lot of characters that he'd created that a lot of the population had grown to like. And, I mean, he is a funny guy. I mean, you could see him in the movie. You can tell that he has this physical presence. He knows what he's doing. Yeah. And I appreciate him as an actor. But it had always been he'd done comedy in order to get into film. He'd always wanted to be a director. He did direct a film called Les Trois Petits Cochons, so the Three Little Pigs. You can check that out. That's a film directed by him. I don't know if he directed the second one, but he is a big name in Quebec.
Okay.
I did quite like the sort of his performance and the way that was juxtaposed with what's the guy's name?
Colm Feore, so he's going to be Martin Ward.
Yes, that guy. So he's very like straight-laced in comparison to this guy who's a lot more
unhinged,
hot-headed.
Yeah,
I think.
That plays into a stereotype that Quebecers believe about the outside, in my opinion. And so Quebec has always seen itself as the, how can I put it, less stuck-up version of Canada, the more risk-taking type of people and whatnot, a little bit more brash. And I think it really depends on where you travel to, because the rivalry that we see in the film is very much Quebec and Ontario. So we have, going back 400 years, Upper and Lower Canada, you know?
Yeah.
And so you can tell just about what's going to happen in the approach when you see them at the border looking at the body that's fallen on the sign, which I thought was a brilliant way to have these two meet, where you're like, really?
Yes.
You're just staring at it like, all right, what's the jurisdiction? And you have that conversation about tennis and then the 100-meter dash, and you're like, all right, there.
Yeah, all the different sport rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. But what I thought really represented Quebec is the how can I put it? The rudeness with which David actually engages with Martin, first and foremost. You know, Martin is going to be a guy that does things by the book, which you're supposed to be doing when you're a cop. And he says, like, Martin Ward. and then the other guy just mocks him, David Butchard. And that's pretty exemplary of what Quebec does. When people, like, they say that during the movie at one point, you'll have him say, you'll have Martin talk about Susie, who happens to be David's ex-wife. And he says, I had heard about Quebec hospitality, but I never thought it was this nice.
Yeah.
And to me, that rings true with an asterisk, where you're like,
okay,
yeah, it is. It is to people who come here, like, let's say from France or from England or from Spain, or, people that are from the outside and they're going to Montreal, then yes. If they're coming to Quebec City, depending on the season, then yes. But for people that actually live here that are of a different culture, it is a very different message. You know what I mean? So let's say Liam was to come here to Quebec, and he'll be like, oh, they've got a British accent. That is cool. But if I just speak English and I'm from Quebec, then I'm a threat. I'm something to be feared.
Yeah.
So it's always a bit weird for me to have that, like, well, why him? Well, I was like, well, he's not from around here. Well, yeah, but shouldn't you be nicer to the people that actually live here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was interesting. That's where I had a little bit of trouble when I was like, oh, come on, man, just say David Bouchard. Can't you just be a nice guy? You haven't met this guy, and just because he's wearing a turtleneck, well, he's wearing a tie in that scene. You don't have to be rude to him.
I definitely got the impression that David kind of comes across as a lot more hostile, at least at the start.
Yeah.
Which I thought, I didn't really know if there was like a reason for that. Like, I'm sure this film is working on a deeper level that I'm completely overlooking because I'm just not familiar enough with the culture.
Right. Oh, there is, yeah, definitely. I mean, the if you look at what we were talking about in terms of the Anglo-Franco rivalry, to me, when I was watching it this time, I tried to keep my mind open to see exactly what the themes were, and the theme itself is one that's very much a Quebec theme, and it's one that's division and separation. And so since the late 1970s, Quebec has been on a huge quest for independence, which literally translates as a separation from the rest of Canada. And so being that the central theme of the film, you look at both families are divorced, so in terms of separations inside the families as well, the fathers are not necessarily connecting with their children, And I thought that it was really interesting to see that time. I'm like, okay, they're still talking about Quebec's independence or the separation, but what separation also means to Ontario and what it means to Quebec. What does it mean to separate these two facets of English and French? And so I always thought that one of the key sentences in the film was Martin Huard when they're just after the car blew up and they're having basically another conflict, and he's you'll have David that's trying to get the food. It was after the house explodes and he's got the munchies because they're like the pot basically is burning through the entire house and they have to leave Gros But inside. He's trying to get the munchies out of the machine, and Martin Huard says to him at one point, "Je me souviens," which literally translates to "I remember" in English, which is plastered on our license plates here in Quebec. And he says that's the problem with Quebec, is that it's constantly living in the past. And he's 100% right, and they made the film in 2006 about something that happened in the 90s. We're talking about the hockey, what he did there. And they haven't gotten over it yet, the idea that they've lost the hockey team, the fact that they haven't gained their independence, although they've broken away from the Commonwealth because the laws in Quebec are clearly different than the laws in Canada. Anything that has to do with legislation and whatnot goes through the Quebec government and doesn't necessarily have to abide by a lot of Canadian laws that they have as well. I'm not saying that murder isn't, I'm just saying like basic laws will probably adopt a little bit more from France or the legislation that they've tried to put forth over the course of their history than the one in Canada. And so the Anglo-Franco rivalry will go as far as to having the two teams here in Quebec. You'll have the Montreal Canadiens versus the Quebec Nordiques. That has always been a rivalry because those two cities can't necessarily get along either. And it's because Montreal has always been a little bit bigger, a little bit more international. People will visit that place more, even though Quebec City is actually the capital of Quebec, And there's a bigger English population in Montreal than there is in Quebec City. And we're talking about 230 kilometer difference, but the threat is always there when you talk about like, oh, English is a threat to Quebec and how the culture of Quebec is threatened by, this looming Anglophone presence. And even if you shoot statistics at them and say like, well, yeah, but the English population of Montreal is less than 12%, you're like, you're not threatened at all, and plus learning a second language is kind of beneficial. Get with the program,
Yeah, that was one of the things that when I first visited, I found it just completely blew my mind, was how like all of the food packages and stuff have like English and French, like all of the signage everywhere. Like growing up here where it's just English all the time,
right?
It just completely threw me that was just a thing that existed.
Right. Where did you visit again?
It's just so common. So it was Toronto and that sort of area mostly.
Okay, and that was the signage was English and French?
Yeah.
Great, because that is in New Brunswick as well. But there was a law that was passed, if I remember correctly. I think it's got to be at least 30 years ago. No, not 30. Roughly 30 years ago, where the signage in Quebec was going to be... They made French the official language of Quebec and not English anymore. And so all the signage in Quebec now is French.
Oh, okay.
And because English Canada... Canada itself is supposed to have 2 official languages, and that's the law. But because Quebec has their own laws, they're allowed to pull this off. And so when you're traveling from Ontario to Quebec and then going to the Maritimes, it's just this weird thing where you're like, oh, English, French, that's great. Did you get to Quebec? And you're like, I don't understand shit. And then you go to New Brunswick and you're like, okay, back to understanding again. I'm glad I didn't get lost.
Yeah.
So that is a very, very strange thing where we're like, well, don't encourage it, because I remember it was fun on stop signs. It said arrêt and then stop. And now it just says arrêt. And they just assume, well, if they see this hexagon, with a red hexagon, it'll be fine, And so I was like, all right. But yeah, the hockey rivalry is one that we talk about in the film quite a bit. And I mean, if you look at, there's something that you guys should check out. It's the Good Friday Massacre, the Quebec Nordiques and the Montreal Canadiens. It's a game from April 20th, 1984, which is basically a rivalry between Quebec and Montreal, but it also speaks to the rivalry between Anglo and Franco Quebec, essentially where this is a game where in the second period, it was just fighting. You'd have the two teams.
Oh, really?
The period hadn't even started yet, and they were already, there was blood on the ice. 11 players were ejected. I think there was a total of 252 penalty minutes according to it was just insane. This giant fucking fight that there was between these two teams. And there was also the Eric Lindros. I won't call it scandal, but in 1991 he was the NHL draft. He was the first round draft pick, and this was an Ontarian who refused to play for Quebec, mostly because of his family, but also because he figured he was better than what the city had to offer in terms of marketing, but also that it was French. And he just cleared the air recently with this. He's 44 years old now. He's been retired for 10 years. And he says that the culture and the people weren't the problem, but rather the team's manager. But back in the day in 1991, the Quebec Nordiques had been like the worst team in the NHL for 3 years straight, like dead last, like not winning many games. Out of 84, there was like 28. Roughly, this team was losing money. And they saw like their first round draft pick. We can build an entire franchise around this wonderful hockey player. And he says, fuck you, I'm not playing for you. And so that's essentially what the basis for Bon Cop, Bad Cop is that thing that happened in 1991 where he refused to play with Lindros. And also, you can see that we're talking about something that is 15 years prior to when this film came out. And it's still part of the narrative where, like, there's this Anglophone that fucked us over. And not only that, I mean, the Nordiques got a really big trade out of that. He went to the Philadelphia Flyers, and then the New York Rangers were involved with that, and they got a bunch of players. They built up a team for the Quebec Nordiques. And at one point, when the general manager, who basically the guy who dies in the pot house in Bon Cop, Bad Cop, is called Gros But. Well, it's Marcel Aubu, which is the real general manager of the Nordiques at the time, decided to sell the team to Colorado. And the year they were sold, they won the Stanley Cup in Colorado. And so that plays again into Quebec's psyche where they're like, they got fucked over again, where they could have had this moment of pride by having one of the teams that was basically one of the worst, and they could actually put everything was riding on this to gain some, not necessarily cultural significance, but having the backbone to say, look at what we can accomplish if we stand together, like the socialist attitude I was talking a little bit. But the rug was pulled out from under them, sadly. And so that's also part of the film.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much of this like film was drawing on real life events.
Yeah, same.
That's all there. And in the mix of that, you know, you have this preoccupation, you know, where you'll have a film that has an $8 million budget that's shot at a buddy cop movie similar to Lethal Weapon, where you'll have the more unhinged character and the more proper character, where you're going to have, you know, it kind of shows just what Quebec's entertainment industry's philosophy is, where people here don't look outside Quebec because of the language barrier. You know, a lot of people know what Lethal Weapon is, but when you look at the Quebec entertainment industry, it's been taking advantage of people for years, you know, and one of the basic places where they have is actually plagiarism in comedy. You know, so you'll have repurposing American shows for Quebec audience, but you'll have the stand-up comedy scene here where I watch a lot of stand-up comedy, you know, Americans, some Canadians, and a lot of some British people. I can't name them right now, sorry. But Jimmy Carr, there's one of them. He's all right.
Yeah.
He's probably one of the biggest there. And a lot of the stand-up comics here will literally steal jokes from, you know, American comics like Seinfeld, Robin Williams. I caught on occasion. There was, oh Christ, I think there was Patton Oswalt. There was a couple of jokes that I'd noticed. You'll even have guys that are going to be ripping off Eddie Murphy. You know, jokes that were relevant in the 80s, but they're still getting laughs today in Quebec because no one's heard Eddie Murphy say those jokes. And so, you're like, Jesus Christ, guys, what are you doing? You can't just constantly be stealing from other places. It doesn't make sense. And so Lethal Weapon, like I was saying, is borrowing the stereotypes of the buddy cop movie and repurposing it for Quebec. Just goes to show, like, that Je me souviens, I remember, is constantly living in the past, where they have trouble creating something new that's going to be meaningful for the culture here. Obviously, we have other players, you know, that are going to be great. One of the best movies that come out of Quebec is La Grande Séduction, which is Seducing Dr. Lewis in English. Wonderful film about small town mentality and how acceptance is going to be one of the prime things that they can learn. I thought that was clever Quebec film. So if you guys get a chance to watch that, go ahead and watch that. But obviously we have guys like David Cronenberg, you know, who directed The Fly, History of Violence, Eastern Promises. And we have Xavier Dolan. Well, fuck him. I don't really care about his films. I think he sucks. But that's just me. I mean, there's Mommy. He's a very good movie, but the rest of his films is just a pretentious fuck. But we also have Denis Villeneuve, who was nominated for an Oscar. I don't remember if he won for Incendie. He recently put out Arrival. Polytechnique is a great film. He did Enemy. You know, we have these very awesome guys, and sadly those films don't work well here in Quebec. They'll work well in the United States and Canada and overseas, but a film like Bon Cop, Bad Cop will sell a lot of tickets here because it speaks directly to what the people are going through in their lives. It speaks directly to where they are, where their culture is, and it's like, this is me on screen. I get to watch that again. And so sometimes it can be fun but disappointing as well for me.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting, though, because I just was unaware of all of that.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess you could sort of factor in, right, taking what you've said, Jason, and then sort of trying to look at the film after that. It's kind of weird because you've got that ending where Martin sort of doesn't become David, but, like, you know, he's the straight-laced guy, and then at the end he blows a dude up by slipping a bomb in his pocket and sort of does the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You know? So you could sort of, if you were looking at it negatively, you could sort of be like, oh, that's them saying, look, the way we do it's the best way. Look, even the straight-laced guy has realised you've got to do it this way. But you could also, if you were trying to sort of find the positive, you could look at it as, you know, this Quebecian police officer and an Ontarian police officer working together, and that's how they solved the, like, individually neither of them would have been able to do it, but working together they did. So it's weird because you could sort of take both messages from it.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I think that there is a positive message. I know that was heavy, I know, but when I was watching it last night, I kind of twisted my tried to take in what the movie was actually about. Like I talk about separation and division, and you're absolutely right, Jack, in saying that if they work together, because I find that the victim in the film, the child at the heart of it, David's daughter, that's exactly what it is. I mean, work together for the kids. And I thought it was a really interesting message for them to kind of have that, where you have these two hard-headed fuckers that don't want to have anything to do with them. Like when you're in the bar and you'll have... that guy, I think is Luc Terrien, who basically, David goes in and tries to... Martin goes in and Rita is hitting on him. And, that was kind of cool. But at the same time, I would have wished... we'll get to the sex scene after, but I'll explain what the problem is with that. But I thought that the message was good. Overall, I think it's a very positive outlook and saying neither one of these guys is right. They both have to kind of succumb and how can I put it? Compromise in the end so that they can actually have a good understanding, because things are going to get solved only if they work together. And I thought that was a wonderful message, because I hadn't picked up on it the first time. I was just walked out of there. They're fucking calling us squareheads, the bastards. Do you know what that is, though, the squarehead, roundhead thing?
No.
See, he calls him a squarehead because this is a very interesting part of Quebec and Canadian history, is like, I am considered a squarehead, and the Quebecers are considered roundheads. And it's funny because if you translate that in French, it's tête carrée, which was the expression in the film, and in tête ronde, which you don't hear in the film. And it's just that when they were building the railroads here in Canada, you'd have the English crew and the French crew trying to work together, and the different types of nail heads. The English nail heads were square heads, and the round nail heads were round heads. And so the rivalry even back then was even in terms of construction. So he would call him, that guy's a fucking squarehead. That means he's not working with us. He has the nails with the square heads. And so that's something that still passed on today, where you can hear it in society sometimes. Like, I'm on a tête carrée. And you're like, fuck, that guy just called me a squarehead. We're talking about something that happened 350 years ago that's still part of popular culture.
It's
just so odd. But
that is crazy.
Yeah. And so that's it. But like the few problems that I had with the film was the sex scene, obviously. I thought that was so weird because when you'll have Rita in the bar talking to Martin, she's intrigued. She definitely wants to have, maybe a one-night stand with him. She finds him sexy because she's surrounded by all these cavemen constantly. And then you have this proper gentleman come in and she's like, oh, finally, someone with a bit of class to take me out of this fucking dump. And she's basically ready, telling him, she's so close to telling him, can you just come out in the back so I could give you a blowjob? She fixes her cleavage before she goes to see him, like maybe this will work on him. And, he's finding it okay, that relationship. But the one character that I thought was just too much in the film was Martin's sister, the blonde chick, essentially, who basically has sex with, what's his face, David, maybe at the end of the second act. And so that's where it got a little bit too far with me, because the sentence that he teaches her, Vive le Québec libre, is a sentence that Charles de Gaulle, who was, I don't know if he was president of France at this point in time, during Expo Quebec in 1967, said that, which probably launched a lot of what the race for Quebec independence was. So it means praise like free Quebec. Let's have like Vive le Québec libre is like, it's going to be great for a free Quebec. And so a lot of people misinterpreted what he meant. He meant a free Quebec, like freedom to express yourself in a place like this, live as francophones amongst Canadians. But the Quebec political party took it and they decided to spin it into, we should live free of Canada. And so that sparked the independent movement. After that led in the 70s, and a lot of what had happened with Pierre Laporte and the murders during the October crisis. And it's just like, you're like, oh Christ, it gave birth to so many revolutionaries. And you're like, fucking hell, you guys, they misinterpreted it and used it for a specific cause. And so by putting that sentence in there while he's balls deep in this English chick is a bit weird for me, because you're having, how can I put it? You're having the culture literally fucked into a woman, like he's
Yeah.
impregnating Quebec through this Ontarian chick, Vive le Quebec live, and she's just humping away at him, yelling the line, and I'm like, that's kind of weird and inappropriate.
Yeah, it's very on the nose.
Yeah. So I thought it was a bit strange to have that scene in there, because to anybody outside, like to Ontario, I don't want people to get offended by that, although it is kind of offensive in my opinion, but I'm not easily offended. I just think it's too much, like you said, on the nose.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also it's a Quebec's wet dream put on screen.
Okay.
Where
Yeah.
they can essentially say, well, if we can't convert the men, we'll get the women. But that puts it in a weird state where you're like, you guys aren't barbarians. This isn't one of those things where, you could just, they're petting themselves on the back with their charm. And you're like, I've talked to a lot of English ladies, and Quebec isn't necessarily that well thought of. And so maybe this guy is a sexy guy, no problem. But that she is this easily duped into getting fucked. And it's also misleading because he kind of wants to get back with his ex-wife as well. He kind of likes her. They have that whole thing going on, and you're like, really? You're just going to have this Quebec fucking Ontario on screen? Literally? Dude, come on.
Yeah, I thought that bit was, like, slightly weird anyway. Like, because Martin wanting to get with his ex-wife made sense to me, because I was like, oh, we haven't seen Martin's ex-wife. He's not being like, oh, I still love her.
Right.
Whereas David is definitely still like, God, I want my
he's a
ex-wife to
family
go back
man.
with me, sort of thing. So it's sort of weird that you then have a scene where he just like meets the sister and is immediately like, "Yep, cool, we're gonna bone."
Yeah, and you're like, oh, I was drunk, it doesn't count. You're like, no, you can't make up those rules. It does count.
yeah.
Although the sister was quite hot.
She looked great naked, man. I'll give you that. That's
Yeah.
100% accurate.
Yeah.
Had I been the director, there'd have been a few closer shots, but
Yeah. The way that was shot and the lighting didn't do her enough favors, I don't think.
absolutely right. But the thing is that it's a very cheeky reference to Quebec as well, because what color is the lighting?
I don't even remember.
Was it blue?
It's blue. And what is on the Quebec flag?
Is it
Blue.
Is it? I want to say
It's blue.
Yeah.
And everything that has to do with Quebec, whenever you talk about Canada, Canada's red and Quebec is blue.
Yeah.
And so to
Yes.
have them
Yeah.
drenched in this blue light, I was like, dude, come on. This isn't
Well, actually,
cool.
like, on the DVD I've got, you can select like the English version or the French version.
Okay, no problem.
And like you said, that selection is split with like the blue and red colours.
There you go. So that's it. Quebec is blue and Canada's red. And it goes with the flags.
Yeah.
And so that's it. So when it was drenched in blue light, I was like, come on, dude. This is a terrible fucking scene. You just put this in so that, it was borderline if you had a bunch of Quebecers being in a screening with their pants around their ankles just jerking off to that sequence. It's like, yeah, fuck Ontario. Literally. Drenched in blue. I'm going to come blue. Oh, it's going to be great. But it's just a weird fucking scene in the movie. But overall, I mean,
Yeah.
the directing is pretty bad. Erik Canuel has had an enviable career, but mostly in television, and I think it shows. There's a lot of Dutch tilt shots going on where you're kind of like, why
Yeah.
are you framing it that way, dude? It doesn't make sense. And I don't know if you notice, there's a lot of low angle shots as well, where you're kind of always staring up at the characters. And I don't know if Michael Bay was very popular at the time and he was taking notes. Where you're like, dude, just put the fucking camera down, because there's a lot of these tracking shots, or even going around the shoulders and over shoulder conversations where they're having supper around a table and he's like, this has to look like an action scene. No, just put the fucking camera down, shoulder, shot, reverse shot, and we'll be fine. We don't need to be moving around. And so this guy probably had this fucking money, just like, we have money, move the camera, yay!
Yeah, but I noticed as well, like, there was like a few shots where the way it was edited, like the lighting would sort of flash, and it was just all of that, like you said, like, this is an action film. I need to remind you it's an action film.
Yeah.
So even though it's just someone essentially exiting a scene, it's still edited in this like ridiculous, actiony, flashy way.
Yeah, there's too many cuts, man. I mean, even you remember when they decide to get in the car and he decides to drive on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Well, see, how many cuts are in that fucking sequence? And not only that, there's rock and roll music playing. Now, how funny would that scene have been had he just gotten in the car, no music, and he's not driving necessarily fast, but he's just honking, kind of like what they did in The Hangover, where he's driving and he has this PA system on. Hey, lady, nice rack, and that's so clever the way that Todd Phillips shot that one in the Hangover. Obviously, we're talking about years later, but you could tell that this guy was like, okay, action sequence means lots of shaky cam, quick cuts, and heavy metal music. And you're like, really? Yeah. You can't do better than that? I mean, we've seen that.
It's interesting. You just made me think, like, comparing literally just that scene has made me think of the way, like, we have Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
So bringing it all back to Edgar Wright as well.
There we go.
Where, in very different, like, thematically and everything, but you have that, like, city life versus the country life, and that kind of culture clash.
Yeah.
And again, you have that in, like, the scenes in the police car and the way that's shot to be very comedic, but shot in a very actiony way with loads of fast cuts.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that point. It just made me think.
Well, I mean,
you could probably do some comparison between the two if you were smarter than I.
No, I don't know. But I mean, I know what you're talking about. Even when you're introduced to Nicholas Angel in Hot Fuzz, the quick cuts at the beginning are well done. I mean, you'll have a lot of establishing shots. Everything is kind of centered, and so the camera is doing all the work, and the editing is doing all the work as well. But at the same time, it's appealing. Whereas this one feels like a very dirty movie. Even the transitions between the edits feel like they've come back from a commercial. Where you're like, did you make this because you were thinking it was going to be a series of episodes? Or did you make it because this is the way the transition filmed? Because it seemed very by the book, but one of those books that was made in the 30s where you're like, oh, if ever they decide to make an action film in the future, it should look like this. And you're like, well, dude, all you have to do is watch a few movies and you'll understand that this is not the way to shoot action. I mean, look at Ridley Scott when he directed G.I. Jane. All he did was like move the camera up and down and sideways. And you're like, stop. That's not the way to shoot action.
Yeah, I have to admit, though, I did find this a lot funnier than I was expecting to.
Yeah, this time around I did too. But what was your favorite part?
Like, I think for me, it was probably the scene where they accidentally get high. And then the scene immediately after where they're being chewed out by the kind of boss, the cop boss from the French side, I think. That to me was just amazing. I loved that.
Yeah. You, Jack?
How about you, Jack?
I think... I'm trying to think. I think my favourite scene's probably... I liked the one where they were... when you have both police chiefs in the office and you've got the English one saying it and then the French guy translating it and then the reveal that both people can speak both languages, so it's just totally redundant.
Yeah. Oh, that was good. I like that too. I have to go with Liam. The pot scene is really good where... they just walk outside and they're like, the house just blows up and they're just like, oh Christ, what the hell? I feel funny. And then, they just start giggling. And then the office sequence after that is brilliant. It was like, when the other cop comes on the line and it's like, hold on. Yeah. What's he saying? I have no idea. I was just lost in thought. So that was great.
Yeah. I also really liked it the first time you meet the coroner.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's another stand-up comic in Quebec. He's very popular here in Quebec. His name is Louis-José Houde. And, he's sold out shows here. He's made himself fucking millions just being a stand-up comic in Quebec. And he's like that. He's the motor mouth, sorry. Just fucking talks and talks and talks. And his stand-up comedy shows are exactly like that. And so that was a brilliant scene where he's like, it's a helicopter, and he describes why it's a helicopter.
Yeah.
It's fucking cool. You're like, it can't be this, it can't be this, it can't be this. So based on this, Definitely. This is what it's going to be. And you're like, okay.
And then I liked afterwards when they both come out and they're like, I understood half of it. So yeah, I understood half of it. It's like, well, as long as we both understood different halves, we're okay.
That was a great joke. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, so what would you both give this film out of 5?
I'll give it a pass. I give it a 3.
Okay.
Because, although the message is kind of fun, I think that as a film itself, it doesn't look good. Yeah. To me, it's hard to watch. There are a couple of places where you're like, oh, this clearly could have been a different take, where you can see that the actors are actually acting and it doesn't feel natural.
Yeah.
And, I just felt, like I said, it felt like a very poorly made for TV movie. And so I have to knock it off for that. And obviously, like I said, to me, the whole living in the past, they could have come up with something a lot more clever then the hockey rivalry and the whole Quebec Nordiques thing and all that. That's where it started getting bogged down. And this is still Quebec. It's a bit sad that we haven't moved past this. Now the second film has come out recently. Bon Cop, Bad Cop.
I know it was
saw
coming
that.
out this year, but I didn't know it was actually out.
Yeah, it's out here in Quebec. I haven't gone to see it. I'm fearful. I saw the trailer and it looked pretty good, but it's one of those trailers where you're like, looks like you guys put the best bits in the trailer.
Right. Because I would be very curious to see the second one after seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to wait the 10 years that they waited here, right?
Yeah.
And so that would be interesting. Yeah, maybe we could basically tweet about it if we wanted to.
Definitely. Jack, how about you out of 5?
I'm the same. I think I'd give it a 3. But it also straddles like a weird line where, like, I enjoyed it and, laughed at jokes and thought it was a good film. But I also don't think I could recommend it to many people because there's that whole, as bad as it is, because I love watching subtitled films, and I think people that are like, I don't want to read subtitles are missing out on some great stuff. But, like, the people that I would recommend this film to are also probably the people that would be like, I don't want to read subtitles.
Yeah, I get that. Like, you have this, like, almost, to very broadly stereotype, the sort of people that would generally like quite a dumb action film, which you could kind of read this as, or like an action comedy film, aren't necessarily going to want to also read.
Yeah, because they're sort of in it for the I just want easy laughs.
Yeah,
and for me, watching a subtitled film is easy because I'm used to it from watching all the anime and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But I can see someone being like, I don't want to put in any effort at all. I just want to watch it in English.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it would be like a 3.5 out of 5. It would be high. Like, it just misses out on getting a 4 out of 5 because I did really enjoy it. And I think one of the reasons for that was how surprised I was by how much I was enjoying it.
Yeah. I could go up to that too.
Yeah, the only thing that I wasn't massively sold on, that we haven't really discussed a lot, was the kind of reveal of the big bad guy who was behind it all.
Looks like a pussy, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the only thing that was a bit, like, weak to me.
Yeah.
It's weird that they set up at the beginning, like, you have that whole scene where he's wearing the sort of the weird hockey mask that isn't quite a hockey mask.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, gee, what are they setting up here? What's this guy going to be? I was like, is he going to be, like, horribly burnt? Are we going to get some crazy...
No.
Like, no, it's just like, oh, no, I'm just upset.
Yeah, he's just like an internet troll
thanks.
looking dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the funny thing is, like, you could tell, like, the influence for this film was clearly a movie like Seven. He was like, we're going to set this up with a really weird green color palette because green was really popular in The Matrix, but at the same time, we have to make this guy look like he's fucking nuts, so we're going to put him in John Doe style, like in Seven, and you're like, you don't have to do that. I wish that stereotype would die. But I think it did a little bit with the Hannibal TV show where you're like, this is very proper. It looks nice around here. As opposed to just this crummy looking location.
Yeah. We've had some correspondence as well, sort of, that I wanted to wait until after we discussed the film. So Ashley Davis, who I think tweeted saying they were going to email in, they've emailed saying, beside the film you're reviewing for the podcast, what is your favourite comedic buddy cop thriller?
Oh man, that's a good fucking question. My favorite buddy cop thriller.
Yeah, the thriller's the thing that's throwing me. Because I can think of good comedic buddy cop
but
films.
Not necessarily thriller.
Yeah, adding in the thriller just throws me. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, like the one I want to go to, but again, it doesn't quite work with thriller, is Zootropolis or Zootopia, depending on where you're from.
Right.
But that's more just buddy cop comedy. There's not really a thriller element to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't picture Zootopia as a thriller.
No.
Let me see.
Would Bad Boys count?
Yeah,
maybe. Does that have thriller sort of stuff?
I'm going to say Bad Boys too. I like the car chase scene in that.
I don't know. I mean,
It's awesome. It's so good that whole car stunt scene where they're chasing the bad guys along a freeway, and then the bad guys are in like one of those lorry things that has all of the cars stacked on it, and they just start like unleashing cars that are just bouncing down the freeway as Will Smith's sort of driving around them. I love that scene.
I think the ones that come to mind for me would be Shane Black's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and The Nice Guys.
Oh, yeah. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is a very good pull.
I think those would be the ones, because I'm not a fan of Lethal Weapons at all. I tried watching them and I just got bored. I was like, oh, fuck Riggs's hair. And, I mean, I liked The Heat, but that's more of a comedy right now.
Yeah.
With Sandra Bullock. I thought it was really funny. I wasn't expecting to like that one. But, I mean, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, I almost provoked a car accident watching that film. I was on my way back. We were driving from Montreal to Quebec City, and I occasionally will let... I'm not a tyrant. My girlfriend drives sometimes as well, but I mean, it wasn't with my girlfriend. I was with her father was driving the car. I was sitting in the back seat because I was tired, and I had just recently bought the DVD for Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and this is years ago. And I was watching it on my DVD player, and when they have that scene with the Russian roulette,
yeah,
I shrieked with laughter and caused my girlfriend's father to kind of swerve with the car. And we didn't go into oncoming traffic, but he was fucking furious at me. He was like, what the fuck, dude? And I was just crying in the back seat at how much I was laughing at that scene. I replayed it. And even today when I watch Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, I am overly eager for that scene to show up so I could just giggle some more. But yeah, that was one of the sequences. So those are the two.
Have you seen Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Jack?
No.
Okay, you need to. It's
my-
Robert Downey Jr.
I'll watch it.
Yeah.
Will you know?
I'm picking one,
Okay,
and I'll argue it if I have to.
sure.
I'll take Hot Fuzz.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's yeah.
Yeah,
It's got thriller elements to it.
yeah. No, I can see why.
For the
where you're
greater
coming from with that
good.
one.
Thank fuck, because that was all I could come up with.
It's a good choice because it pulls from so many different things. I mean, you've got elements of speed
Yeah.
in there. You'll have mostly Bad Boys as well. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it is an amalgamation of very many, many movies.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Ashley has more questions for us. Are there any other dual English/French films you highly recommend, which I think is more for you, Jason, than it is for me or Jack?
English-French, I think this was an experiment that they did to see if they can really kind of consolidate both cultures in Canada. But no, none that come to mind. You'll have, like I said, a couple of mentions that I had earlier, with David Cronenberg's films. If you're looking for a French Quebec film, that's great. There are two that I could recommend. One is the Decline of the American Empire, which is a movie that came out in the 80s. And that's a very good film. The director's name escapes me right now. I've got his face in my head, and I just can't remember his fucking name. Denis Arcand, that's his name. So Denis Arcand, so Arcand, and Denis is Denys. And so he made two films. I think they're separated by roughly, is it 15 years or 20 years? I don't remember. And so the Déclin de l'Empire Américain, so the Decline of the American Empire, which is followed by the Barbarian Invasions, Les Invasions Barbares. Those ones are really good, solid Quebec films that people could watch. Okay. Like I said earlier, La Grande Séduction was probably my favorite Quebec film. So Seducing Dr. Lewis, that one's brilliant. And if you guys can see Denis Villeneuve's early films like Maelstrom and Polytechnique and Incendie, obviously, those are very, very solid Quebec films as well. Those are the ones that come to mind. There are probably more that I could recommend, but they're not like Anglo-Franco the same way Bon Cop, Bad Cop is.
Yeah, I mean, the only one I can think of, and I can't remember, I don't think there's a lot of English speaking in it, but I just looked on IMDb and it does say under language French, German, and English. I think it was made in France. Yeah, it's a French film.
Right.
Jules and Jim.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't seen it, no. I know what film you're talking about, though.
Yeah, like I said, I can't remember how much if that has English in it. I think there's a small amount, but that's the only other one that I can kind of think of off the top of my head.
Let's see, there's another film that I was thinking about that just escaped me that I could have recommended. Hold on. I'm just going to get the director's name. It's a film that goes back to, I think it's the mid 2000s. It's called L'Audition, so The Audition.
Okay.
And looking it up right now. There it is, 2005. with one of the best Quebec actors, who is actually called Luc Picard, so Luc Picard. Essentially, it was bringing us back to Star Trek a little bit, to Jean-Luc Picard. So, and he actually directed the film. It's called The Audition, and the film is about a. To me, it's loose. It has an American Beauty vibe to it, although it's not. It's a guy who's going through some sort of midlife crisis, and he's a guy who's basically a bodyguard. He's a guy who goes to break legs for people that owe money to loan sharks. So he's a hired thug. But his secret ambition was to be an actor, and so because he's slowly starting to get fed up with how his life has been in terms of breaking legs, which seems to be not that fun according to him.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That one's a good one because you can see him going through his acting process and what he's dealing with emotionally and whatnot. I don't agree with the end of the film. But overall, if you're watching the film itself, Luc Picard's L'Audition is a very good Quebec film as well. A good one.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to butcher the name now. What other Erik Canuel, I don't know, films are a must-watch?
None.
Is it Canuel?
Canuel.
Canuel.
Yeah, Canuel. You can say it like that if you want. None of his films are a must-watch.
Okay.
He mostly dabbled in TV. He's recently directed a film that's in the United States. I don't remember exactly. There's a lot of people in it. You guys can look it up on IMDb, but it doesn't look good. He basically adapted. There was a Quebec TV show called 19-2, which was a police unit TV show, which is pretty brutal. A lot of people really enjoyed it here. That was adapted for English Canada and probably tried to sell it to the United States, and he was the guy who was directing it for English Canada. So 19-2, but it didn't really last that long. It wasn't as brutal as the Quebec version. So Erik Canuel, like I said, he has an enviable career. He's a working director, but I can't recommend any of his stuff. This would be probably the biggest budget he's ever had. Most likely, I don't know if the new American one he has a bigger budget on, but no, this is pretty much it. He didn't even direct the second one, so.
Oh, fair enough. Jack, are there any of his films that you think are a must-watch?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think Red Nose.
Okay.
Brilliant film.
Yeah.
Le Dernier Tunnel, also great.
I'll tell you.
The Outlander.
Yeah. Le Dernier.
I'm literally just reading his IMDb page.
Le Dernier Tunnel is actually not bad. It's with a good Quebec actor as well called Michel Côté. And he's really good. Michel Côté, he was in a film called Crazy as well that really did well here in Quebec but also internationally. About it's a coming of age story about a man, a young boy basically growing up to realize that he's gay, and how that was perceived in the 70s. And so it's a really good film with Michel Côté. It wasn't directed by Canuel. Red Nose, Le Nez Rouge was the first film that he did with Patrice Bélanger. So the guy who plays David Bouchard in Bon Cop, Bad Cop was in Nez Rouge as well. And that's a very poor Christmas film. Where I was watching it, I remember with my ex-girlfriend, and maybe it's one of the reasons I'm not with her anymore. It's just a terrible, terrible fucking movie. It's really, like, I thought that the directing was shitty in Bon Cop, Bad Cop. It is far worse in Nez Rouge.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but the Dernier Tunnel is
Jack's
alright.
just recommended it.
Okay.
Sorry.
And then lastly, what's your most anticipated summer release?
Dunkirk.
Yeah,
that does look good.
I see. At the moment, for me, it's The Big Sick. That's the one I'm really desperate to see.
Yeah, it's got good buzz. I want to see it, but it's not the one that I was anticipating. So.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's the one I'm currently most anticipating because I saw a trailer for it recently, and I knew a little bit about it.
Oh, cool!
But the trailer just has me completely sold. So at the moment, that is, but I don't know if after summer I'll be like, that was my favourite film, because I think Dunkirk definitely stands a good shot.
Yeah, Dunkirk, War for the Planet of the Apes also. That is one of the best unsung trilogies of the 21st century, where people should get to that, because it's going to be in 10 years when people will be like, what the fuck? These were great. My parents haven't even watched them, and I was like, you guys need to get on top of this. This is fantastic fucking movies.
I really want to see them.
I really like them.
But because I have to do things in order, it means I have to go back and watch the original Planet of the Apes.
No, man, they're not even related.
First.
Don't.
I know they're not. I'm just broken in that's what I'll have to do.
Yeah, you won't be able to convince him, Jason. This is what he does.
Yeah, I'll convince him.
Please do.
Because, I mean, listen, I have a friend who used to watch the Planet of the Apes movies because his father used to watch them. And I remember him buying the big box set that came out that had the whole ape head and all that stuff. And he
got that.
Started plugging them in one by one. And even the first film, he was like, yeah, it's still pretty good, but I understand why it was on TV. And then they just got progressively worse. And it's just not, how can I put it? As an idea, it seemed fun on paper, and they weren't able to translate it well. And I think that there's just this romantic idea that like Charlton Heston was the man every man wanted to be. And I remember watching The Planet of the Apes and going like, fuck this. This is fucking boring. It's really a waste of my goddamn time. And there are some people out there. There is a community the same way that there's a community for the Ghostbusters. And sometimes I'm just like, you know what? Maybe there's just not enough water to drown them out because they should all go away. But I seriously, Liam, if you want to do them in order, you should start with Rise of the Planet of the Apes and then move your way into the older versions because that's where they're leading. So these are kind of prequels.
Do it story-wise. Okay, I see.
So.
But then again, like, no one's going to suggest that you would watch, like, Star Wars Episode 1 first if you've never seen Star Wars before.
Maybe not if you've never seen it, but I suggest that order sometime.
I do.
Yeah,
I do. I do it. I don't say film order. What I do is I tell them to do the machete order, which is, you forget the Phantom Menace, but you start with Attack of the Clones. And then after...
See, I think I prefer Phantom Menace to Attack of the Clones.
Oh, definitely. But in terms of story-wise...
Attack of the Clones is boring.
Oh,
Phantom Menace has a lot of trade politics in it.
Yeah, but Phantom Menace has at least like 2 good scenes, whereas Attack of the Clones has none.
Yeah,
fair. Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, if you're going for the budding relationship, when you watch Attack of the Clones first, and then after that, you watch... Oh, what's the order? No, that's right. You watch Star Wars, you watch Empire Strikes Back, you watch Attack of the Clones, you watch Revenge of the Sith, and then you cap it off with Return of the Jedi. That's the machete order.
Okay.
And that's kind of cool because the prequels act as a flashback just when Vader reveals himself to be Luke's father. Then you go into Attack of the Clones and you see how he became Vader, in the middle of all that. And then you'll have both their story arcs coming to a close in Return of the Jedi.
But would you recommend that to someone who has never seen Star Wars?
Yep. I did recently, actually. There was one of my buddies that was like, hey, I've never watched Star Wars. And I was like, this is the last message between you and I. What can I do for you? And so he said, well, what would be the order? And I said, okay, watch Star Wars. I said, watch Rogue One first. Watch Rogue One, then watch Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, do Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Return of the Jedi, and then Force Awakens. And he says, what about Phantom Menace? And I said, you can watch it whenever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fit into the overall story. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
Fair enough. Jack, what's your anticipated summer? I'm assuming
the Emoji
Dark
Movie.
Tower. Oh, so what was it?
The Emoji Movie, Liam?
Obviously. Right.
I can't wait.
Yeah, which emoji do you most relate to?
I like Poop Emoji. He's so funny. No, you were right. It's the Dark Tower. Yeah. I'm terrified that it's going to ruin one of my favourite book series of all times.
Okay.
But I'm hoping they don't cock it up.
I just don't like Idris Elba, so...
That's fine. I think it's an interesting choice putting him as Roland, so hopefully it'll pan out.
I mean, interesting is a word you could use, I guess.
Yeah, Liam, I'm so negative.
Oh, he's just a dickhead.
Whatever. Yeah, but it's not... It doesn't matter.
So thanks for the email, Ashley. I hope you enjoyed our answers. We had one final email, and that was from your co-host, Lee, who said, why the fuck wasn't I on this show?
I asked Liam the same question, Lee, and he said, no, we'll get you guys separate. That way it'll make a more contained show, which we'll be lying because we're over 2 hours now. And then we'll get all 4 of us together again. And so, Lee, just take it as a compliment that they really wanted to set time aside for you specifically, as opposed to just us sidelining each other throughout the entire episode. I think it's very flattering that they'd want to dedicate a show completely to you.
I mean, you could look at it like
we're
this.
doing.
Yeah, go on, Jack.
I was going to say what we're doing is we're machete ordering our guesting on each other's shows because we've done me and Liam together. then Jason, then Lee, then all four of us again.
Good call.
Yeah. I mean, the way to look at it is essentially, instead of having you just both on and that's it, there's now going to be like 3 episodes with you kind of on individually and then together.
Right. There you go.
So,
Basically, we're milking your listeners. We want them to listen to us.
I mean,
that's
great.
one way
I
of looking at it.
hope they go. I hope they listen. I mean, it's going to be a long ass episode of me just fucking talking and talking and talking with you two guys at the other end. It's like there's dead silence. I think they went for supper and just let Jason go.
I mean, I was just learning and I was absorbing a lot of information.
Yeah. Hopefully it comes off as that. You know, you're going to have this French Quebecer listen to this like, where the fuck does this guy live? I'm killing him. How dare you shit on our culture? And I was like, no, I'm being fair. I'm looking at it as objective as possible. I like Quebec. I've always enjoyed it here. I hate the fact that I have to wait months for movies. But other than that, it's a really safe place to raise my kids. I have a great job here. You know, and it's a beautiful fucking city. It's actually voted one of the best cities to live in. So, yay for that. I can't praise it enough.
Yeah, that's good. And if we do have like a huge Quebec audience listening, I'm sure that's just redeemed any ill feelings they might have had towards you.
I doubt it. I think there's 3 or 4 people.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on and teaching us a lot.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
where can people find you?
You guys can find me on Twitter at AtlanticSC. My name is Jason Michael. Forgot to mention that. I don't know if we talked about it earlier. We also have a Facebook page for the Atlantic Screen Connection podcast, and I'd love if people just went over there and gave a review. Nerd on Nerd is one of our favorite podcasts. So we're always interacting with Liam. Jack hasn't given me a follow yet, so maybe this episode will be kind of cool.
I realised that today, Jason. I looked on my Twitter and I was like, oh shit, I'm not following Jason. And then I was like, if I do it now, it's going to look like some sort of pathetic, oh, Jason's coming on, I should probably like him.
No. I just wanted to throw that out there so you feel a little bad. But that's it. They can find the Atlantic SC podcast or the Atlantic Screen Connection podcast on their podcast players of choice. So iTunes, SoundCloud. We're on Stitcher Radio as well. I think we're on Overcast somewhere. So anything that you guys listen to, we're on that. And that's it. We had a couple of highlights this season we were really happy about. Our Alien Covenant episode was so well received. We weren't expecting that because we got really pretentious on that one. Fast and the Furious 8, so Fast 8, or Fate of the Furious as it's called here in North America, got really great reviews.
That's been my favorite one so far.
Yeah, where we just went ape shit. We decided to run with it, and I couldn't believe the response we got for that one as well. And I want to say a big thank you to Reed Schmeed. I won't give her her real name because she has students out in California, and this is a very touching thing for us. She actually assigned our podcast to her college students to do a paper on.
Really?
Yeah, there's a
That's
college in California right now that was given 4 of our episodes to. They get to choose one, and they had to look at how. How research is done essentially and how you can talk about a film without necessarily talking about a film. And so it was so flattering. I want to give a big shout out to her because that was such a highlight for us. You know, we haven't been doing this on for a long time. We've been active for about 10 months and the response has been great. And I mean, like I said, we've been big supporters of your show, and I love the fact that you guys were big supporters of our show as well. I like Nerd on Nerd. It's the one that I anticipate the most when I'm like, all right, let's see what these fuckers are going to be arguing about this week. It's going to be great.
I mean, I really respect the amount of like research that you guys put into your show because we do not do any.
Yeah.
And it's quite nice to actually listen to a show where you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, we do our best to sound like we know what we're talking about, but this is...
Yeah, which, you know, you think when I have to listen to Jack like every other week, it's a refreshing change.
What a slap in the face. Oh...
I'm used
it's
to
either
it.
that or he was just saying, you know, I have to listen to Jack every other week, and so I need to dumb things down by listening to the Atlantic SC podcast because Jack's is bringing.
Yeah,
way
I think
too
we
much
both
to the
know
table.
it wasn't that positive,
Yeah,
Jason.
I don't think anyone's pulling that reading from it.
Well, that's the way
Although
we can
I am-
interpret sentences.
I am now thinking, like, imagine, Jack, if we ever get to the stage where some college professor gives their class 4 episodes of ours to choose from.
You know, they can do it after they do Jason and Lee's podcast. They do ours, and they go, "No, this is how you do it wrong."
No,
now, what can you tell us about Liam's bowel movements, and what should he be eating more of?
Liam's showering less was a really good episode. I'd recommend it.
Awesome. Jack,
Yes,
if people want to tweet us,
they can do that at Nerd on Nerd.
what if they want to email us?
They can email us at nerdonnerdpod@gmail.com.
What if they want to watch the YouTube videos that I do for us?
They could go on YouTube, Liam, and they could type in Nerd on Nerd. All one word?
Yeah. What if they want to, like us on Facebook?
They could go to facebook.com/Nerd on Nerd pod, all one word.
Fantastic. And if they're on iTunes and they want to leave a nice little review and a rating, could they do that?
Well, they could, but like we said last time, we don't really understand how iTunes works. So,
No, but all the other podcasts say to do it, so...
They do. Go like us on iTunes.
I'm sure
and say
it helps
that we were
somehow.
good.
Is that it?
Yeah, I just got to say a shout out to Lee. I forgot to mention him earlier. So don't forget.
Yeah, we will be having Lee on soon.
Yeah,
We're sorry,
So
Lee.
the Atlantic Screen Connection podcast is a podcast I host with Lee Brady, and you can find him at Big Pick Reviews. Sorry for not mentioning you earlier, Lee. Mwah, mwah. Big kiss.
Perfect. Any final thoughts, Jack?
No. I'm bad at coming up with final thoughts.
What a way to round out the show. Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye.
Liam,
Yeah?
we've got to do the fucking next time on.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were just having so much fun talking with Jason that we didn't actually, plan this podcast.
We're real good at this, guys.
What are we doing next time, Jack?
We're doing Sunstone, Liam.
Oh, Volume 1.
Volume 1.
What do you know of Sunstone?
It's the sexy comic that you keep trying to make me read.
It's not like...
It's lesbians and BDSM, right?
Yeah, but... Yeah. But it's not like a porn comic, like some of my ones I've got that I've made you read.
I've seen some of those ones you've got. They are very porny.
Yeah, this isn't that. So, okay, no, because I genuinely would like it if people would actually read this. Like,
Okay.
I really.
You
like
have
it.
said to me before that it isn't porny. You got it originally because you thought it would be, but then
And
you
it
actually liked the
fucking
story.
Tricked me into loving the characters.
Yeah.
So we'll be discussing Sunstone. If a comic about BDSM, and lesbians sounds appealing and isn't, I promise it isn't like sleazy. Like, we're not going to be like recording this with our trousers around our ankles. Like, none
We don't
of
do that anyway.
What?
Jesus.
Yeah, honestly, would recommend it to everyone listening right now. Go, read, enjoy responsibly, and then email us your thoughts.
Bye.
Bye again.